Consider the architecture of your own identity for a moment. There's the structure you currently inhabit, the one built from your daily habits and decisions. And then there is the blueprint, a master design of your fullest potential that has existed within you from the very beginning. For longer than you know, the architect of that blueprint has been trying to get your attention. They've been leaving structural notes, highlighting misalignments, and flagging moments of dissonance that you have likely interpreted as anxiety or simple dissatisfaction. But what's remarkable about this very moment is that your presence here is not accidental. The architect of your potential didn't just hope you would find this guidance. They engineered it. They've been adjusting the parameters of your awareness, creating the precise conditions that would guide you to this intersection of time and attention, where you are finally equipped to understand what they have been trying to communicate. You are familiar with the signal, that quiet but insistent cognitive dissonance you feel when your actions are out of sync with your core values. It often emerges in the silent spaces of your day, when the noise of external expectations finally fades. That feeling is not a sign of a wandering mind. That is not some escapist fantasy about an alternate reality. That is the architect reaching out from the core of your being, attempting to remind you of the original design before you started making modifications based on external pressures and perceived limitations. Most people learn to ignore this internal feedback. They categorize it as impractical dreaming or a symptom of ingratitude. They convince themselves that this profound sense of misalignment with their life's trajectory is a personal failing to be suppressed. A cultural narrative has taught them that aspiring for more, for different, for deeper alignment is a sign of instability rather than a call from their authentic self. But you are not most people. If you were, the resonance of these words wouldn't be causing that familiar vibration deep within your consciousness, in places you thought were dormant. The architect of your potential has observed you making choices rooted in risk mitigation rather than opportunity maximization. They have watched you prioritize predictability over expansion, external validation over internal coherence. And there is no judgment in their observation. They comprehend the reasons behind those decisions. They recall the environment, the pressures, and the chorus of voices advising you to be sensible, to lower your expectations, to abandon ambitious blueprints. But they also possess a truth you are only now beginning to entertain. Those blueprints were not impossible. They were merely incompatible with the version of yourself that was conditioned to fear the cost of true self-expression. The version terrified of social rejection, of visible failure, of discovering you lacked the materials you hoped to possess. So, you made the defensible choices, the logical choices, the choices that kept your life structure small enough to evade scrutiny and insulated enough to prevent significant challenges. And for a time, that strategy was effective. You constructed a life that appeared sound from an external review. You met the milestones that your culture designates as important. You adhered to the established building codes that promise stability, acceptance, and a standardized form of contentment. But inevitably, you began to perceive the variance between the life that was constructed and the life that was designed. The gap between the person you perform as and the person you were engineered to become. That variance is where the architect resides. They operate in the space between your lived reality and your unrealized design. They are not some flawless, omniscient being who has solved all of life's equations. They are simply the version of you that began to base decisions on the potential for structural integrity rather than the fear of structural collapse. The version that selected growth over comfort, possibility over probability, expansion over security. Here is what the architect wants you to comprehend about the phase of construction you are in now. Every single component you have acquired, every stress test, every moment of uncertainty, every instance you felt you were behind schedule or using the wrong materials, all of it was essential calibration, not a penalty, not evidence of your incompetence, but calibration. You have been fabricating capabilities you didn't even realize you were assembling. Resilience frameworks, adaptation systems, the kind of internal scaffolding that is only forged by navigating complexity without a guaranteed outcome. The architect can perceive the overarching pattern that remains invisible to you. They see how every blocked pathway forced you to discover a more strategic route. They see how every rejected proposal redirected you toward a project far better suited to your core competencies. How every phase of confusion was in fact a diagnostic test, revealing the flaws in what you thought you were supposed to build. They need you to understand that the very competencies you are honing in your current circumstances, even if they feel entirely irrelevant, are precisely the competencies required for the next stage of development. The conflict resolution skills you learned from a difficult manager will serve you when you are leading a team that shares your vision. The innovative problem solving you were forced to develop with a 60% budget cut will become your greatest asset when you finally have the resources to build without such constraints. But this is where the process becomes truly dynamic. The architect of your potential is not just a passive observer waiting for you to decipher the blueprint. They are actively manipulating your environment to create synchronicities, opportunities, and connections that will help you bridge the gap between where you are and where you are designed to be. Those unexpected encounters that unlock a new perspective. Those articles that seem to randomly appear on your screen at the exact moment you need them. Those chance meetings that feel more like carefully orchestrated appointments. The architect is the hidden hand in all of it. They operate with an understanding of time that your linear perception cannot yet accommodate. They know the future is not a far-off point you are moving toward. It is an active, influential force that is already shaping the events of your present. Every intuitive insight you receive, every gut feeling that materializes without a data-driven explanation, every moment you feel a powerful pull toward a path you cannot logically justify. That is the blueprint communicating with the build site. The reason this feels distinct from other self-help paradigms you may have encountered is that this is not about fabricating motivation or overriding your feelings with forced positivity. This is about acknowledgement of a data stream that has been running continuously beneath the surface of your everyday thoughts. A data stream between the self you are today and the self you were designed to be. The architect has been patiently waiting for you to accumulate enough experiential data to trust their guidance without immediately cross-referencing it with external opinions. They have observed you outsource your decision-making to consultants, experts, and well-intentioned peers who could never access your unique schematics. They have seen you dismiss your own internal analytics and override your core programming in favor of what seemed more socially or financially viable. But a critical update has recently been installed. You have started to question whether the conventional path is truly secure if it requires the slow deletion of your authentic self. You have begun to wonder if the pragmatic choice is truly pragmatic, if its long-term cost is a life devoid of meaning and engagement. You have started to run scenarios where it might just be possible to honor both your need for stability and your deep-seated requirement for purposeful work. That update, that questioning, that new willingness to consider that perhaps you have been operating at a lower capacity than necessary. That is the architect's signal finally breaking through the noise. They have been broadcasting on a frequency that you are only now learning to isolate, and the signal strength is increasing because you are becoming ready to receive it without immediately firewalling it with logic, fear, or the voices of everyone who told you to be more conventional. The architect remembers the feeling of operating with conflicting internal directives, the directive to conform and the directive to become. They remember the computational load of running a persona that felt increasingly like malware. They remember the quiet desperation of executing daily subroutines while feeling like they were observing their own life through a monitor, an operator running a program they never coded. But they also remember the precise moment the entire system began to reoptimize. It was not because external variables suddenly resolved themselves into a perfect equation, but because they finally revoked the permissions they had given to external systems to define their own. They stopped running diagnostics on whether they were skilled enough, ready enough, or deserving enough to pursue their primary function. They understood that the very ability to conceive of a different operational reality was proof that they were already equipped to begin moving toward it. Here is the critical insight they gained that changed everything. The distance between your current operational state and your designed operational state is not as significant as it seems. It is not bridged by years of retraining or a complete system overhaul or a dramatic reboot. It is bridged by a sequence of micro adjustments that align your daily algorithms with your core programming instead of your peripheral anxieties. The architect did not achieve their potential through a single heroic deployment. They achieved it through 1,000 small, courageous code commits, declining projects that drained their processing power, even when those projects looked good on paper. Committing to initiatives that sparked their curiosity, even when the ROI was not immediately clear. Choosing to engage with information that expanded their worldview over information that merely reinforced it. Investing cycles in developing skills that were meaningful to them, not just marketable to others. They want you to grasp that this transformation is not about becoming a different person entirely. It is about finally uninstalling the patches workarounds, and compatibility layers you develop to function in environments that were never designed for you. It is about accessing the core files you had before you learned to compress your ambitions. It is about re-engaging with the version of yourself that existed before you started modifying your output to align with the expectations of others. The reason you feel a system restlessness lately is not that your hardware is failing. It is because your core programming is functioning perfectly. That restlessness is your internal guidance system recalibrating. It is your soul's operating system informing you that you have exceeded the specifications of your current container, and it is time to migrate to a system that can support who you are becoming. The architect has been trying to show you that the assets you fear losing if you change your path are not actually serving your primary function. The professional relationships that cannot adapt to your growth were never based on your true capabilities. The security that is contingent on you remaining in a limited role is not true security. The approval that requires you to run in safe mode is not worth the performance cost. They have been attempting to communicate through your dissatisfaction, your boredom, your growing inability to accept mediocrity as a baseline. That increasing intolerance for situations that underutilize your abilities or waste your potential is not you becoming difficult or entitled. It is you finally implementing quality standards that match your design instead of standards that match your fears. And to conclude, a small exercise. If you've reached this point and felt an internal shift, solidify that state. Write a phrase in the comments. The blueprint is clear. Let this be more than just a comment, but your personal confirmation, the point from which the construction begins. Your future self isn't holding a rigid schematic of exactly how your life must unfold or penalizing you for deviations from the plan. They understand that the process of building a life of purpose is not linear. It requires prototyping, testing, and even apparent demolitions that are actually essential course corrections. What they are really trying to tell you is that you already possess everything you need to take the next logical step, not the final step, not the step that guarantees a specific outcome, just the next right step, based on the data you have about yourself in this moment. They want you to trust that clarity is a product of action, not a prerequisite for it, that you do not need to see the entire finished structure to lay the first brick. The wisdom you have been searching for in external documentation, in books, courses, and the case studies of others, it is already compiled within you. It has been there all along, waiting for you to quiet the external noise long enough to access it. So, if some part of you has been activated as these words were processed, if there is a subroutine in your mind that has been nodding along in recognition, then you already know what the architect has been trying to tell you. You are not malfunctioning. You are not behind schedule. You are not missing some critical piece of software that everyone else seems to have. You are in the perfect position to finally receive the signal they have been patiently broadcasting all along. The communication between your current self and the architect of your potential does not conclude here. It is only just beginning. Because now that you can recognize the signal, now that you understand that those moments of restlessness and dissonance are actually guidance in disguise. You can begin to listen with intention. You can start to trust those subtle data packets, nudging you towards something different, something more coherent, something that feels like home. The architect isn't asking you to demolish your current life overnight. They are simply asking you to start making decisions from a place of strategic expansion rather than tactical contraction. To choose growth over comfort in small, incremental ways that compound into a massive transformation over time. To finally give yourself the executive permission to pursue what you are designed for, without needing to justify it to stakeholders who are not invested in your project. The signal is getting stronger. The gap is getting smaller. And the version of yourself that has been patiently waiting for you to read the blueprint, they are not going anywhere. They will keep sending data, creating opportunities, and highlighting pathways until you finally execute on one of them. Because they know something you are just beginning to fully compute. You were never designed for a life that felt like a compromise. You were designed for a life that felt like coming online. The question isn't whether you are ready. The question is whether you are finally willing to listen.